Hello and welcome to the Art of Being Human. You know, I'm going to be doing something a little different this morning. I'm going to be going into body typing theories. What are body typing theories? Well, they are theories that your personality is based on what your body type is like. For example, if you're tall and thin, you probably have certain characteristics that are typical of tall and thin people. If you are shorter and heavier, then you have different characteristics based upon your body type. And so your body type, whether it's thin, tall, heavy set, short, whatever it is, that determines what your personality is like. Now, personally, I don't take much stock in it. I know I've gone to seminars, all-day seminars, in which several classes are available. And I know I went to one in which my friend went to a body typing thing on Sheldon's body types, and they had a lot of fun with it. She came out of that bubbling and dancing around. Oh, this was so much fun, and I learned this and I learned that. And I didn't take that particular class because I knew that once I get into that, I would probably excuse myself and then just go do something else for the hour. Why? Because frankly, I don't think you can ascribe personality types to body types and connect them together. But what I'm showing you today is the fact that some people do, and these theories are out there, but no reputable psychologist pays much attention to them. For a psychological test to work, it has to be researched, and it has to be valid, and it has to be reliable. Any IQ test, personality test, aptitude test, interest test, any of those kinds of testing, they have to be reliable and they have to be valid. And years of research can go into a test before it's ever allowed on the market. So I want to describe the difference between reliability and validity. Reliable means that if you test somebody several times, the results are going to be about the same. If I should take a person and I want to find out what their IQ is, now I need to remind you that IQ tests are not completely perfect, but they do tend to show things. You know, it's not like you can say I have 106 IQ, so therefore that's what I'm going to carry around for me for the rest of my life. People tend to do that. They get a score in their head, and then that's what they are, and that's what they believe they are, and then they act according to what they think they are when the test might be wrong. They may be 120, they may be 145, who knows? But in order for a test to be reliable, you should be able to test a person several different times with similar tests and come out with similar results. So if I'm going to be testing a person for IQ, I might want to give them 4 or 5 IQ tests. The waist, you know, that's a very popular one, and it tested various areas, and it's also very reliable. So these tests, if I say I give a person 5 IQ tests, they should range in close to each other. Not exactly. There will be some discrepancy, but they'll be fairly close. A person might have 106. Then they might have 115, or they might have 102, but they're all within a kind of range, a kind of normal range. Exactly normal would be 100 for most tests. Now, this differs with the type of test that you take, of course, but for the most part, 100 would be normal, 120 would be quite high, 135 would be extremely high. But if I test you 5 times and you're always in the 130 range, I know that test is reliable because it's testing the same thing and you're getting about the same results. Now, if a person's 106, they might go down to 98, or they might go up to 110, but that's still within a certain range. 15 points one way or the other is going to be within a normal range. So that test is reliable. It is testing a person, and it's coming out with reliable results because the results are similar. And that's what you would expect in a good test. Now, validity is something else. Is it testing what it is supposed to test? You know, if I were to take a group of 100 people and I give them all an IQ test, and the vast proportion of them come back with like a 75 IQ, which is borderline normal. It's actually toward the retardation. And then am I really testing what I'm supposed to test? Is that test really testing normal IQ, or is it testing something else that I don't know it because the research hasn't been done to show it? Maybe out of those 100 people, 75 of them have grown up in poverty, and they haven't had the advantages that normal families have. There's been no music lessons, there's been no art lessons, there's been no sports, there's been nothing in what would raise your IQ because you're doing something. And so therefore, you come out on the low side. There hasn't been books or records or TVs or any kind of music in your home. And so therefore, you are kind of culturally deprived. And so your IQ is going to show it. It's going to show lower because of the cultural deprivation that you've had because of growing up in poverty. Maybe you haven't had the nutrition that you need. Nutrition is important. Maybe without the nutrition, your brain has not been able to develop its true potential. So you come out lower for that reason. In that case, the test is not valid. It's not testing what it's supposed to test. What it is, it's testing something else. What it's testing is the effect of deprivation on a person's IQ, because 75% of the people that I'm studying or giving tests to have been deprived of normal things because they grew up in poverty, so their IQ shows lower. Are they lower in IQ? Maybe not, but they haven't been able to grow into what they are able to do, so therefore I am testing the effects of their deprivation rather than what their true IQ is. So a test has to be reliable and it has to be valid. The test results have to be fairly average range, normal range, no matter what I test, because I'm testing for a certain thing, and I know if it comes out pretty much the same each time I test, that it is reliably showing me something. So it's a reliable test. If it's valid, then it's testing what I want it to test. If it's not valid, I may be checking and testing something else that I don't realize that I'm testing. That's the reason why tests go through so many years of validation and reliability tests before it's ever allowed on the market. So most of the tests that you have, and I know some people hate tests and don't rely on them and all of that, but they do tend to show tendencies that are important. If they've been tested and they've been researched out, and then a lot of times they will give you a lot of strong hints. An interest test, if you give interest tests and the person is honest with them, and a lot of those tests will have questions such as, do you prefer art to sports? Do you prefer music to drama? Or what are your preferences? Would you rather go to a concert or go to a football game? You know, and there are a lot of questions, and you have to choose which you prefer, and it's based upon your own interest and your own ideas. And if you're honest with it, and you give honest answers, then it'll test what your interests are, and it will do so pretty reliably. Now, of course, in being involved with psychology, as I have been over the years, we've studied a lot of tests. We've given a lot of tests. I have tested my father a lot. He was a willing subject in a lot of the experiments we did, and it was basically IQ testing, and he was extremely high IQ, just next to genius level. He was very, very bright. And so we would test, and every time I would give him a test, it came out the same. And so therefore, I knew that the tests that I was giving him were reliable because they were testing about the same. If he had come out low on one test and really high on another test, that I would wonder if either one of those tests that I gave him were reliable. Were they really testing what I wanted to test? Because the results would be so different that they wouldn't make sense. One person being very bright or very low, that doesn't make sense. If they're bright, they're bright. If they're not, they're not. And so therefore, the tests have to be reliable. If a valid, it has to be testing what you think it's testing. And if it's testing what you think it's testing, then you have a valid test. It is valid in the sense that it's testing what it's supposed to test. And so a lot of research has to go into these tests before they're allowed out into market. Now, have been through history, efforts have been made to relate body type to personality. And I think it's a bunch of crock, but a lot of people do believe in it. I would never, as a therapist, I wouldn't rely on it at all. But I can remember there was an intern that came to my office, and I was going to be working with her, and she had this test, and she says, all of my clients just love this test. They have so much fun with it, and they're also, they like it so much, and they think that it proves that who they are. They have this characteristic, and that characteristic, and that characteristic, and that proves that the theory is true because they line up with the theory. But the problem is there are just too many unanswered questions. You can't really rely on something based on body type. What if a person is tall and thin when they're in their 20s? As the years go by, they're still tall. They're no longer thin. They've gained a lot of weight, and their body shape has changed with the weight that they have gained. Then, what are you testing? People change. How do you adjust that? The type of test I'm going into is Sheldon's test. Now, Sheldon has a body imaging test in which he takes body types, and I'm going to show these to you, and characteristics of those types. And if you have those characteristics, you probably have that kind of body type. But what does that do to individual differences? And what does that do to people who change over the years? People who maybe had mental difficulties when they were young, grew out of them, or had therapy and got out of them, so they no longer are in the same space mentally as they were a few years ago. How does that change anything? And it won't change their body type. They're still either short or they're tall, but your body type can also change with the weight that you put on, with things that happen to you, with surgeries that you have. So I don't put a lot of stock in this, and I don't know of any psychologist, any theorist, anyone that I know of that I've worked with over the years, they don't work with this theory at all. But people do like these theories, and they think they can explain themselves and they can explain their personalities with these theories, and they go right into it. And so Sheldon's happens to be a very popular one. So I want to go into Sheldon. So let's take a look at his body type by looking at this chart. Notice he's divided people into three types of bodies: endomorph, mesomorph, and ectomorph. Those are the three. Hard to remember the names maybe, but that's what they are. And each of these body types has a different type of personality to go along with it. So what I'm going to do is describe what he thinks your personality is going to be like. You might be able to classify yourself in terms of body type. The endomorph is rounder, heavier. The mesomorph is taller, is more muscular. The ectomorph tends to be tall and thin. And these are the diagrams that he uses to discuss his theory. So let me get into that. This relates a person's personality to the structure of their body, which I don't think has a lot of validity to it, but nonetheless, I'm going to go over the theories anyway because they are popular. Let's take a look at the endomorph. The endomorph has a round body, and the personality is this. They tend to be friendly, but they're also insecure, and they tend to eat too much. Gee, if only I'd had a clue. That would give it to me. Well, being round, being heavy-set, being friendly, and with a lot of people, they tend to fit this, but of course, as I say, it doesn't describe changes. What if this person goes on a diet and becomes thin? What if he becomes, instead of shorter and fatter, he becomes shorter and thinner? Does that change the personality? Well, there's nothing to indicate that in this theory. So friendly, insecure, eats too much. Now the mesomorph, tends to be, it's the one in the middle, the mesomorph, more muscular. They tend to be adventuresome and energetic and direct in their manner. In other words, there's a different type of personality that goes along. Instead of being friendly and eating too much and insecure, they're adventuresome, they're energetic, they are direct in their manner. They want to do things, let's do this and do this and do this, and they're active, and they're healthier. According to his theory, they're healthier, they're more muscular, and so you have them a little taller, and they're not so heavy, and they were more direct, and they may be more career-oriented. And then you get to the ectomorph. This is a tall and thin person. Tall and thin. Now, the ectomorph has this kind of personality. They're fragile, they're thin, they're sensitive, they're fearful of groups, they worry a lot, they're non-adventuresome. They don't like to take risks. Tall, thin, nervous, worry, fragile. Now, it may possibly be, as you look at this, that you can fit yourself into this, because sometimes people can. They can fit themselves into this. But if you were to change, supposing this ectomorph decides to go in a bodybuilding exercise routine, and they become more like a mesomorph, does their personality change with it? There's nothing in this theory, at least not that I know of, that causes that would explain a change in your behavior, a change in your weight, a change in your interest. What if something happens and you your personality changes? Now, I think a lot of our basic personality is driven by our inheritance. You know, you take two children, you take twins, and they're identical twins. Most of the time, their personalities are about the same, because in a twin that's an identical twin, one egg becomes fertilized and then splits in half and becomes two. But they're exactly alike. It's like taking a piece of pie. You cut it in half, you have two pieces of pie, but they're the same thing. They're just different, a different separation there, but you have the same thing. Now, if you have twins that are not identical, fraternal twins is what they are called, you can have two different individuals. With fraternal twins, you have two eggs. They happen to be fertilized at the same time, and they grow in the same womb, but they're two separate people because they come from two separate eggs. They were fertilized by two separate sperm, but they happen to be fertilized together, and they share the same placenta, they share the same space in the uterine cavity that the woman is carrying them. Now, I happen to be a fraternal twin. My sister is 10 minutes older than I am. And we joke about it constantly. If she sees somebody who doesn't know me, she introduces me as her twin sister. She says, I'm 10 minutes older, and that means I'm 10 minutes smarter. And she says it as a joke. To us, it is a joke. It doesn't make any difference to us. I think she's just as smart as I am. She thinks I'm smarter than she is. What does it matter? We're two separate people. We happen to grow in the uterus at the same time. We happen to be born 10 minutes apart. Now, we were my mother's first births. And she knew she was having twins. And her doctor said, how would you know? He said, you've never been pregnant before. You don't know what it's like to have twins. But she says, I just think of this two. I think there's more than one. Well, when she went to the hospital to give birth, my sister was born first, and lo and behold, there I was, the second one, which she predicted. And we have been very, very close over the years. We've never had an argument. I guess the last argument we had was when we were about 4 or 5 years old, and my mother stopped the argument. It was really funny the way she did it. We were arguing over a toy. Now remember, we're 4 or 5, so we had a big picture window in our living room, and it was summertime. She took my sister and put her outside the window with a rag and a bucket of water and had her wash as far as she could reach. She put me inside the window, and I had a bucket of water and a rag, and I'm supposed to wash the window as far as I could reach. So we were facing each other, washing the window from different sides. She was on the porch, I was in the inside. I can barely remember it. I remember it a little bit. Well, by the time a minute passed, we were laughing at each other and talking to each other, and the argument was over. The window washing was over with. We've never had a disagreement since, and we're in our 80s. So we did pretty well, but our body types are not exactly the same because we're two separate people, and we share a lot of the same beliefs. We share a lot of the same things because we grew up together. So how much does it's a nature-nurture thing. How much is your personality based upon what you're living, how you're growing, what you're exposed to? And as twins, being the same age, we were exposed to the same thing, the same family dynamics, because we were there. We were only 10 minutes apart. And so our personalities aren't the same. Our body types are a little different, but not that much different. She's a little shorter. I'm a little heavier. But this would not explain us at all. And so therefore, you just have to be careful of these theories. Now, we're coming close to time. There's a couple of other theories I'll go through, but I think I'll go through it on the next session. They're not that important, and I just want to kind of give you something a little lighter to think about. If you do fit in, then fine, but don't try to explain your whole personality, your whole decision-making, your whole life based upon what you look like in terms of your body type, because it just doesn't work out. It doesn't have the validity or the reliability that we need to have as psychologists, as people who are counselors, to deal with it. So I'm going to close this theory here, and we'll start off next time with another couple that I want to discuss. So please join me next time.